Hello and welcome to The Exit presented by Flippa. I am your co-host Steve McGarry here, and on this special episode, I sit down with Yaro Starak. He is an incredible entrepreneur, the co-founder of Inbox Done. But before we get into this really powerful interview, definitely be sure to check out my previous interview with Melissa Kaufman, the co-founder of The Garage at Northwestern. It's a really great interview. We talk a lot about the research around young entrepreneurs and some of the characteristics that really pop out early on. So definitely check that out with some of the links that are in the show notes here and description, wherever you're listening to this. So jumping into today's interview, Yaro is an amazing entrepreneur that has bought businesses and sold businesses. He's done great content. That's actually how I found out about him, was Googling around, and I found that he was one of the top ranked bloggers about buying and selling businesses. And right now, Yaro is a co-founder of Inbox Done. He coaches entrepreneurs and anyone who's selling an online training or an info biz. He takes their business to the next level. Definitely check out all of the links to Yaro's blog, as well as, his online training and things like that, in the show notes, in the description, wherever you're listening to this podcast. So without further ado, let's jump into my interview with Yaro. What's up, everybody? I am here with Yaro Starak, the founder of Yaro.blog. How you doing, Yaro?
I'm good, Steve. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So I actually came across Yaro's blog quite some time ago when he was talking about buying and selling websites part-time. And that piqued my interest because not only are you emphasizing the part-time aspect, but you're also emphasizing some high six-figure numbers. So we had to jump onto the podcast and talk about how you kind of look at doing this part-time. So before we get into that, let's kind of go over your story, Yaro. Like how did you get into this space?
Yeah, it's a long story now. I started in 98, so there's 22 years of various internet businesses there that I could talk about. But the website buying and selling story is very much connected to my kind of startup phase for my experience online, because I was initially just a young guy trying to figure out how to make a living on the internet, just playing with it. And that led to starting a hobby website about a card game called Magic the Gathering, which is still extremely popular nowadays. Now it's an online game with a professional tournament league, but back then I was playing with friends and at some tournaments as well. So that was a typical kind of like a magazine website. Content I was writing, content other people were writing. Loved it for 2 or 3 years. Then I kind of lost interest in the game and moved on to an essay editing company. It was sort of like I call it my first real business, because that's the first business that I made a full-time income from. And I focused on that after graduating from university back in Brisbane, Australia. So I kind of got into it because of both those websites. I mentioned them both because the Magic one was the first website that I actually sold. And it was the first site that I kind of experienced or even contemplated the idea that a website is an asset, a piece of property that you can sell. So that was kind of like an aha moment. And I'll be honest, this was so early that the Flippa was called the SitePoint Marketplace. So for the real oldies, they'll know why that was. And that's not where I actually sold it. I'm not even sure if I knew about that website yet. So the idea of buying and selling websites was very nascent. I don't think anyone was talking about it as like a thing you can do. It's certainly the big companies were being sold all the time, but not sort of like me owning a hobby website. And I sold that eventually to a person who was in my community. So they were a reader of the website, a person who traded cards. I had a little forum where people were buying and selling and trading cards. So, I won't share the whole story of how that got sold, but basically, found this buyer, concluded the deal. I made like $13,500 from selling a website that kind of made me about $500 a month. So I was really happy, especially because I was moving on from the topic, but more so it's the most money I'd ever made in one transaction. Prior to that, I had part-time jobs and, I'd make that much money in 1 year of working. And that opened my eyes to it. So, as I grew my editing company, there was always this potential as well. Oh, I could sell this business. At some point, it wasn't necessarily my first goal, but fast forward 5 years, and I was actually running another business, the one you mentioned. Now I was in the blogging space, and I was just really getting into that. I still had this essay editing company. It was paying me just a basic kind of salary, sort of an entry level income source. And I was like, you know what? I love blogging, and I love that space, and teaching and podcasting, and being a content creator. And I saw that as my future. So again, I was like, I should just exit this essay editing company. And that's when I started looking for a buyer for that as well. But while that was all happening, and this is sort of overlapping stories here, I did really get into SitePoint, which by then had been rebranded to Flippa, as we all know it today. And there was this period for a couple of years where I was like running a blog, running, own the essay editing company. And then I'm like, this is crazy. I've got some spare cash. What could I invest in? I love the idea of buying websites. So I don't know if you want me to continue, but I can then talk about my first purchase of a website as well, which kind of happened randomly. Not through Flippa, but it was again another eye-opening moment that not just can I sell these assets, but a website is a piece of property, but it's not just that. It's potentially a new customer source for an existing business, or a new revenue stream as a new startup business you buy. So there's all kinds of benefits I hadn't really thought of at that kind of granular level. And like you said at the start, I kind of never thought, people take money that they're earning from whatever they're doing. It could be their job, could be their small business, and they invest that money, whether it's buying a property with a mortgage or putting into stocks. And I remember, actually, it's funny, I read, I think, Rich Dad Poor Dad for the first time, the very famous book that kind of pushes a lot of people towards property investing. And I remember reading that, and one of the points was like, you should invest where you want to spend the time to develop your knowledge, or you already have some kind of knowledge and skill set. And I'm like, well, I'm not really interested in learning about the suburbs of where I live, and the property, demand, supply, rent, all that kind of, it was all physical, real world property. And I loved websites. And I'm like, well, if I kind of follow the advice of this book, I should invest in an area where I have knowledge, which at that time I'd spent a good almost 10 years then, essentially growing websites, managing websites, building little teams to run websites for me. So that's when I thought, well, I should invest there. And that's when I started really using Flippa.
Nice, nice. And in terms of that, I like that you touched on, you know, literally that one transaction was a year's worth of part-time salary. And I think that's a great kind of segue into, what do you think is the first step that a lot of people need to get over when they're, let's say someone listening to this has a blog that they've been managing, it makes a couple $100s a month, for with your example, what is the first step to getting ready to sell that that project that they've been building over time? Did you put together anything like a package, that you were going to offer to buyers out there? What would you say for a beginner that was listening in? What would that initial step be to get ready?
Yeah, that's an important question, and that it evolved for me over time as I got more practice at both being on the buyer side and seeing what information other sellers provided, and then being on the selling side. That first time when I sold my card game website, obviously, I didn't have guides. There was nothing out there that was sort of teaching you how to sell a website, so it was very much making it up as I went along. And I definitely produced a basic prospectus style document, which to be honest was more like an email detailing important things. And for me, it was a logical decision to think, okay, if I was going to buy this website, what would I care about knowing? So I really thought about, the shoes of my potential buyer. And I thought, well, I know everyone cares about income first, obviously. What is the income? How is the income produced? Most important questions there. And in your mind as a buyer, you're thinking, can I do what it's stated that is needed to do to keep that income going? So for me, it was not just this website makes 500 a month. It's 500 a month because you're publishing an article a week, and you're dealing with questions in the forum, moderating. There's these tasks that keep the business going. So I kind of wrote all that out. I talked about how it makes money. Some of it was advertising, some of it was selling cards themselves. Um, Talked about the management of it, mentioned little things like there was some volunteer writers, so the content didn't have to be only on the owner's side. There was other people willing to write. And then I talked a little bit about kind of like, a day in the life of the owner. So you can kind of experience. So when you wake up, you might have to respond to a few emails, check in with your ad revenue. Might be some questions like a moderation needed in the forums, deleting some spam posts, that sort of thing, and just kind of outlining all of that. And then that, and I'll be honest, that was kind of basically it. The other hard part for me was how much to sell it for. Again, there was no kind of guides for coming up with a price. So I literally pulled this number of 3 times the yearly profit is what I would try and sell it for. So at the time, it kind of made about 5,000 a month if I, took out the small expenses I had. Oh, obviously you have to list expenses as well, like how much does it cost to run the website? So server costs, is there any software you're paying for, that sort of thing. And that was it. And it was really just a case of circulating that information to people who are actually ready, showing interest, not people who are like randoms. You just wouldn't send it everywhere because it's kind of private. But anyone who emailed back after I reached out to them and said, yeah, I'm actually interested, I'd pass that on. And then the next step would obviously to get on a phone call and continue that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Like a prospectus.
Yeah.
Love that.
And
Everybody.
obviously that got more advanced over time,
Yeah.
and that was a smaller website. As the value of the asset got bigger and more detail had to go into that prospectus, better presentation, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense because it's almost smoothing the transaction out even more because people can see this is the exact amount of time investment I'm going to need to make in acquiring this asset and bringing it on. So the easier that you can make that, the better and the faster the transaction. That's really pretty impressive that you did that because there wasn't a rubric back then. There wasn't anyone really talking about it that much, and I think that that's really cool that you managed to put that together all on
Yeah.
your own and get that into the hands of a buyer. And I like that they were from your community too
Mm.
for the first site. I think that speaks a lot to how you were doing the sourcing to find a buyer. I think that that's really cool. And one constant that I think you might like that I've seen across all these conversations is people bring up what you touched on, which is one business that you could buy could facilitate a need of a bunch of other businesses that you have, or one business you currently own. If you bought a new one, it could facilitate your portfolio however you see fit.
Right.
And I think that that is something that everyone has mentioned. So clearly there's a trend there where it's an alternative mindset that you're coming into it with, where you say, if I have let's use the example of Magic the Gathering because I like that. I have a card trading exchange or marketplace. I'm going to buy a Magic the Gathering blog because it just makes sense. The people that are reading that blog will get value from my current business. And I think that that's a really great mentality of how to go out and look for something that you could add as like an additional revenue stream for a current business. And depending on the size of your business, I think you could do smaller acquisitions and things like that. But when you did the jump into this, what was the kind of big barrier? Because I know you've created quite a lot of great content around helping people do this. What did you see was the kind of restricting element to getting into this space? Was it
Mm.
people that were nervous about the amount of money that it cost them to get involved? Was it the diligence aspect, like they were worried about getting something that they couldn't turn around if it was trending downward? What was your experience with that? Was it with people signing up for
Mm.
your course
Yeah.
or reading your content?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time as I've been, talked to people over the years, and it's funny. No matter what year I talk to, the same question would be the first fear, as you're talking about, the kind of stumbling block, and it's always well, there's too much competition, like especially when we all know about Flippa. So we all go to Flippa and everyone thinks, well, if anything good comes up, they just won't have a chance to get it because someone else will get it. I had the same fear even the first time I went in there, and that was, a long time ago. And I think it's funny because it is something that you would experience. For me, 10 years ago, the first time I'm going in, 5 years later, 5 years after that, there's always competition. There's always interest in something that's valuable, like a website. What I think is a natural, maybe like a strategy, which you just talked about, really, to dealing with that is the fact that you can see value in an asset where others can't. And this is obviously an analogy for physical property buying as well. The fixer upper is this kind of diamond in the rough for certain people, but other people, like, I don't want to do that. So I went into my own experience, like when I started looking for websites, thinking that way, going, I have a strategy to look for a type of website that gives me an advantage to go after, but not just an advantage, just a comfort zone. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about fear here. Like you're afraid other people will beat you to it. You're afraid you'll buy the wrong website. You're afraid the money will disappear as soon as you take over it. That was for one of my biggest fears. The first time I bought a website was that I buy it, I look at it, and then I check the income, and the day after I bought it, it goes to zero, or goes, for 50% less than what the person claimed or showed me when I looked at their prospectus. So, and I think for me, that's why looking for a type of website or a system that I understood was a big part of the strategy, and I think still should be. And even if you take a step back before that, if you don't have an answer to that question, like if I said to you, what type of website are you comfortable with? Like, do you like an advertising focused website, or a physical product like an e-commerce website, or a website that's a blog, a content driven website, or even just like, what's the monetization strategy? Are you good with affiliate marketing? If you don't have an answer to that, then that's probably the first thing to do, is get some experience there, which you could do by investing in a website. I mean, that's one of the great things, is you don't have to enter, like I did, buying a multiple thousand website. You can buy a $1,000 website, spend that savings you might save up over a few months and buy a starter website. Maybe it doesn't have much income at all, but it's got traffic. It's doing something that you can then look at. Because I think for a lot of people, they've never owned a website that actually has traffic and has an audience that, people react to. So just owning an asset that does that and seeing how it does that, checking the Google Analytics, seeing if there's an email list that's growing, just these basic metrics, you go, okay, I understand how this works. Maybe I start to learn a bit about the target audience as well. Hopefully there is some revenue, even if it's small. It's like, oh, I see, we're making $50 a month from selling advertising or something like that, or selling this affiliate product. Then it's like, oh, okay, learning, getting comfortable. And that's basically what I did. But obviously my training was the running of my Magic card game website, and then the running of my essay editing business, and then the running of my blogging business. So for me, like, to deal with that fear and as a strategy to have an advantage. And when I say that, it's not just an advantage for your own comfort zone, it's an advantage to bid against other people, because that's ultimately what you're afraid of, is the competition. If you feel like you have a strategy in place, so you know how to run this website, or you can slot it into your portfolio and immediately have a runoff benefit, which, just to give a practical example, as a person who had a blog at the time, still do, but had a blog back then, very much focused on advertising and affiliate marketing, I knew if I bought another blog on a similar topic, if it had X audience, it probably meant X dollars increase in advertising and affiliate sales. Not guaranteed, but I felt comfortable with that. So to me, that meant I could, potentially bid a little higher than other people who were maybe brand new to that space and go after that type of website. So that was one of my strategies, looking for blogs. My other strategy ties all the way back to my card game website. I had a forum, as I mentioned earlier. It was a trading card forum. People bought, sold, and traded cards. And I loved the fact that they would go back to that website every day, and I'd make money from advertising because they just would create page views. They were traffic, basically, and it was user generated content. So my goal, besides looking for blogs, was looking for forums, user generated content websites. So that's kind of like the start of my official Flippa strategy at that time. So obviously there's a story I could share there, but that was kind of like the way I dealt with that common fear. And I think it's great advice for someone who's new is find an area where you can have a comfort zone, an advantage, so you feel comfortable making a higher bid perhaps, or going after only a certain type of website.
Yeah. And what was the initial strategy? You touched on it there. What was the initial strategy that you were going into Flippa with?
Yeah, so I experienced just before Flippa, like I said, my first purchase was actually not on Flippa. So I had, the sale of the card game business. Then I got into blogging, and while I got into blogging, I met other bloggers virtually, so to speak. And there was a guy named Michael who had a blog about small business. And one night I was just talking to him on the chat platform, and he said he's thinking of getting out of this topic and wants to sell his blog. And honestly, I would not have thought of buying it if A, it didn't match the same niche. I was in the business space. He had a business blog. B, I had experience selling my card game business, so I kind of knew how that transaction process worked. How do you hand over money for buying a website? What due diligence do I really need to look at? Um, so I went to bed thinking I'm going to make an offer for this. I had him hand me the same information that we just talked about. How does it generate revenue? How much does it generate? What's the daily day in the life of owning this website, this blog? And it was totally familiar to me. It's like, you got to publish some blog posts. It makes some money from advertising and affiliate income, and that's it. And then I knew it was on WordPress and all these sort of nuts and bolts components. My comfort zone as a blogger. So I woke up the next day and said, "Listen, I want to make an offer." It was, I think, $2,000 at the time. Was definitely a low ball offer if we think about today's kind of numbers, but
Hmm.
at the time there were not any kind of examples to look at. And it was funny because we ended up doing the deal. He said, it was like maybe 300 a month in revenue, so it was a good deal for me. But he was also happy to do it because he wanted to make sure the site continued in good hands, to quote what he was looking for. So we did that transaction, and then I wrote about it on my blog saying, "Hey, I just bought a blog, and this is what's happening." And then I had other blogs write about the fact that I had acquired a blog. It was like one of the first ever mergers of two blogs in my space. So it turned into a press event, which would never happen today because it's obviously so commonplace. But back then it was kind of like a, it's when eBay and PayPal merged. It was like my blog and this other blog merged kind of situation. And that was great. But then that made me realize, obviously, I took over the website. I saw my income remain stable, and I was able to increase it. And I had some other challenges. Running two blogs confused me in terms of which blog do I write content for, because they're similar topics. And I eventually brought on other writers to make that more clear for me. But more than anything, it was like, okay, this is an awesome revenue generating strategy. So that's when I said, I'm going to start watching Flippa for two things: blogs about business, so I can do a repeat of what I just did, just plug it in, make more advertising, put a team in place to produce content, have a manager. And I was already eyeing someone to potentially be my asset manager who would look after all the websites that I would buy. I had strategies for increasing revenue, which just came about from running my own blog, knowing I could charge more if I put the banner here, or look for additional advertisers, create more banner spaces, and so on. And then my second strategy was to go looking for forums, just because I love that user generated content aspect. Wasn't caring about the topic so much. It was the structure of the website. It was a forum, an active community, a certain number of new posts every day was like my core metric I was looking for. I wanted to make sure it was healthy and alive. So then I just started literally every day waking up and logging onto Flippa and just looking at the new listings and trying to find myself and get in there quick, because that's the thing. I remember I missed one deal because I was too slow. I literally was there, and then it was gone within 24 hours. So I knew from that point forward, if I saw something that the numbers look good on the listing on Flippa, make an offer like straight away. You got to get in there fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Love the community and forum approach. I think that's really smart. Really smart. And it's a great example of how you a $2,000 deal. I mean, the average mom and pop investor has that, amount of money sitting around on average, and they could easily do something like that, hire somebody maybe on Upwork or Freelancer or something like that to help with the content generation. And you have, like you said, stable and then increased income, because you started very much what I was mentioning before. you had a blog, and then you acquired another blog, and that generates more income. So really love that strategy. I think that's really cool because
Yeah.
it was a press event because it was in a niche, and there weren't many acquisitions in that niche. So it makes sense that there was a nice little bump there
Yep. That
from.
was made me famous for one day anyway.
Nice. Well, that's a good transition into what you're working on now. So I did get a chance to go through your blog and see that you're helping entrepreneurs create online courses. Is
Mm.
that right?
Yeah, well, I'll just tie up the bow here of the buying and selling story just quickly because I know we're running low on time. Um, I did end up buying a forum inside Flippa. Just to clarify, I ended up I upped my game. I actually bought a $12,000 collection of two forums and a content site
Nice.
on a topic of miniature motorcycles. So that was a really cool experiment in the sense that I had no interest in the topic. I mean, if people don't know, these are like proper motorcycles that you ride, but they're maybe two-thirds smaller than a full-size bike. But there's a huge community of them, and in this case, it was an Australian-focused community, which
Mm,
was an advantage for me because I was at the time based in Australia, and I was able to kind of connect with the buyer in the sense that this will be an easier transaction from one Australian to another, same time zone, same sort of company structure, easy to transfer ownership, that sort of thing. So the only thing that was scary was I was investing $12,000, not $2,000. So it was a little jump ahead in that case. But I went through with the transaction and followed the blueprint, and increased the advertising revenue once I took over, put a manager in charge of the website and added it to my portfolio, which by then was like, essay editing company, two blogs, and then adding these miniature forum sites as well. And then to sort of really complete the picture, I ended up selling all of these except for my blog website. I sold the essay editing company. I sold the miniature motorcycle forums. A few years later, I
yeah.
let the revenue come in. It was I wouldn't call it passive, but it was very hands off because I had a manager in place. So that's when I called it a side hustle. It really was. I wasn't like trying to do a deal a month or anything like that. I'd done a couple of good deals. They were working really well. I improved the revenue. I put a team in to automate it. But my mind was all in. I'm a blogger. I'm creating content, like you said, what I do today and what I've been doing for many years. I have courses on how to essentially sell using blogs and email lists. That's my kind of bread and butter. It's what I've got a skill set in now for over a decade. So I was there doing that as my day-to-day business, writing articles, delivering a course, teaching on webinars. Meanwhile, there's these little assets to the side, which I would just check in with the manager and, hey, how are things going? Are you implementing the ideas we had in our last call? Some worked, some didn't. I shared some income with him because he, obviously need to get paid for managing them. But it made it such a side gig for me, and I loved it because it felt a little bit like a mogul. Your little tiny bit of Warren Buffett, where you're buying your own assets like that. And I was doing what I loved every day, which was teaching and coaching and writing about how to make an information publishing business. And then I was just funneling money into those when I could. Eventually, the reason why I sold everything was I actually just wanted to get the capital out of those businesses. And I bought a house, I bought a car. So I went on a bit of a selling spree. After doing a buying spree, it's like, okay, let's sell the essay editing company, which went for over 100,000. I sold the community of forums for double what I paid for. It was like 25. I think it was actually $30,000 when I sold those. And same, I sold the second blog as well. So everything was gone within about 4 years after acquiring them. But it was amazing. And honestly, if I wasn't so passionate about blogging and teaching and coaching on the topics that I have for the last 10 years, I would have still been buying and selling, I'm sure, or buying and just holding probably, because I think it was such a great strategy that you can still do today. If it's your main thing, great. If it's a side hustle, possible as well. You don't have to hold 10 websites. You can hold one and just have that as an income stream. But great strategy. I still love it, especially for people new. If you just don't know what topic you want to get into or what product you want to sell, just head on over to Flippa and you've got just examples in front of you and you go, okay, would I like to sell this set of knives on this e-commerce site, or would I like to write about how to do home decor on this blog and sell affiliate products? What would be the role that I would enjoy? So I think that's a great thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, it just really stimulates the creativity around just business in general or online business. And what you mentioned earlier, I really liked about the aha moment when you acquire something that's, let's say, getting 100,000 views a month to someone who's never had an active audience before. It really starts the creative wheels turning where you're like, whoa, all these people all of a sudden care what I have to say, and I now own this asset. So just the revenue streams in your mind just start churning, and it
Yeah.
really can generate a lot of um, great additional streams of income because you have these active and kind of vibrant communities that you're acquiring.
And you are forced to learn. That's
Yeah.
huge. Yeah, that's when the rubber hits the road, as they say.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for tying the bow on the entire like 4-year journey. That's fantastic that you exited all of those and then now you're focused on the teaching people how to generate email lists through blogs and sell courses and things like that. So is that's the primary business that you're focused on now? Where can people go and learn more about it?
To be honest, after 20 years, there's more than one business, and the actual business I'm well and truly focused on right now is I won't talk too much about it. It's called Inbox Done. We do email management for people, so that's inboxdone.com.
Okay.
But I'm still very much writing my blog, and that's kind of like my face online at yaro.blog, Yaro. You can just Google that; you'll find it that way as well. And all my content on buying and selling websites and businesses is there. So if you just look for that category, you could just go through the history on that blog. And of course, you can check out everything else I do there as well. Yaro.blog.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Yaro. Really inspirational story. Love the idea of starting in something like Magic the Gathering, working your way all the way up to six-figure exits. I think that's fantastic. But thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me. I love talking about this topic. So good luck, everyone.